"Please, just let me hide in your wagon till dawn," the bruised bride pleaded. The whip handle was still warm from my hand when she came out of the dark. I'd pulled the team off the road just past the Colfax cutoff. Not because I was tired, though I was, but because Delmer, the near-wheel horse, had been favoring his left foreleg since Cimarron, and I didn't want to push him on the grade in the black. I'd unhitched them both, tied them on a long line to a cottonwood, and I was checking that foreleg by lantern light when I heard feet, not boots, shoes, moving fast through the brush off to my right. I didn't reach for anything. I just stood up and held the lantern out. She stopped at the edge of the light like a deer that hadn't decided yet. White dress. Veil torn and hanging off one side. Something dark on her cheek that wasn't shadow. I said, "You all right?" She said, "Please, just let me hide in your wagon till dawn." I looked at her face. The dark on her cheek was a bruise coming up fast, already swelling the socket. Her lip was split. The dress had been grabbed at the shoulder. I could see where the seam had gone. I said, "Get in." That was all. I didn't ask her name. I didn't ask what happened. I opened the back of the freight wagon, moved a crate of dry goods to give her room, and I handed her up. She was shaking, not cold. It was June, just shaking the way a person shakes when the body hasn't caught up to the fact that it's over for now. I went back to Delmer's leg. There was heat in the fetlock, but no swelling yet. I worked some liniment into it, wrapped it loose with a strip of canvas I kept under the seat, and then I sat back against the wheel and listened to the night. Frogs down by the creek, the horses pulling at grass. Inside the wagon, eventually, quiet. I was 51 years old that summer. I had been running freight between Raton and Springer for going on 9 years. And before that I had done other things I don't talk about much, scout work mostly, and a year as a deputy in a county that doesn't exist anymore. I lived alone. I owned the team, the wagon, and a one-room house in Springer with a stove that drew crooked, and a bed I slept in on one side out of habit, even though there was nobody on the other side and hadn't been in a long time. I was not a man people noticed. I was the man who showed up with what you needed and left without making a fuss about it. That suited me. Around midnight, she pushed the canvas flap back and looked out. "I can hear you," she said. "You haven't slept. Don't sleep much on the road." She climbed down without asking permission, which I appreciated. She was steadier now. In the moonlight, the bruise looked worse, jaw to cheekbone, the eye starting to close. She sat down on a supply crate I'd set outside and folded her hands in her lap and looked at the horses for a while. Then she said, "His name is Garland Prout. He owns the R north of Rayado. The wedding was this afternoon." I waited. "He hit me before the reception was over." She said it flat, the way you say something you're still deciding whether to believe. "In the coat room. Because I spoke to his foreman, just spoke to him, asked him to tell my father the ceremony had run long. That was all. I didn't say anything. He said if I left, he'd ruin my father. He has the note on my father's property." She looked at her hands. "Maybe he will." "Your father know where you are?" "No, I just ran." I turned that over. Garland Prout I knew by name, big operator, the kind of man who bought politicians and sheriffs the way other men bought horses. He had reach. He had lawyers. A woman with a bruise and a torn dress wouldn't get far on her own before his men found her, and whatever story she told wouldn't matter much against his. I was quiet long enough that she looked over at me. "I'm not asking you for anything else," she said. "Just till dawn, then I'll go." I said, "Where?" She didn't answer because there wasn't an answer. I got up and banked the small fire I'd made earlier and stood there a moment with my back to her, looking at nothing in particular. "My name's Callum Briggs," I said. "I run freight to Springer and back. I'm going through in the morning." She said, "I know who you are. My father used your wagon twice, 2 years ago when the mill road was washed out. He said you were reliable." I turned around. "I am." I let that sit. "There's a woman in Springer," I said. "Margaret Collies. She runs a boarding house on the east side of town. She's a widow and she doesn't answer to anybody. If you need a place to land while you work out what comes next, she's a fair woman." She was watching me. "I won't tell you it's simple," I said. "Prute's going to look for you. He'll say what he wants to say. But there are men in Springer who know me, and if I tell them what I saw tonight, that counts for something." Her eyes, the good one and the swollen one, stayed on my face for a moment. Then she said, "Why would you do that?" I didn't have a fancy answer. "Because it's right." She was quiet then. "My name is Nora Vass." "All right," I said. "Miss Vass, get some sleep. I'll wake you before first light." She went back into the wagon. I sat against the wheel until morning. Her father's name was August Vass. I knew him slightly. A dryland farmer who'd broken himself trying to irrigate 50 acres near Acate. He was not a lucky man, but he was a straight one. The note Prute held on him was real. I'd heard it mentioned once at the feed store in Cimarron, the kind of thing you file away and don't think about again until you need it. When we pulled into Springer the next morning, I took her to Margaret Collies first. Margaret was a stout woman who had buried a husband and raised 3 sons by herself and did not impress easily. She looked at Nora's face, looked at me and said, "Come in then," and that was the end of the conversation. I went and found Red Casper. Red was a man I'd done business with for years. He ran cattle on the West Range and had enough money and enough stubbornness that Garland Prute had never been able to buy him. He also had a long memory for grudges, and Prute had cheated him on a water rights deal some years back. I told Red what I'd seen. He listened the way he listened to everything still, without moving much. When I was done, he said, "The Vass note." "That's the problem," I said. He thought about it, then he said, "I might know a man." The man he knew was a land attorney out of Santa Fe named Brower, who apparently had a professional interest in the kind of paper Prute liked to write. I didn't ask more than that. Some things you don't need to know. I went back to my route. The thing about freight work is that it gives you time to think whether you want it or not. 3 hours on the box seat between Springer and Raton, nothing but road and sky and the sound of the team, and your mind goes where it goes. I wasn't thinking about her the way a younger man might have. I was past the age of fooling myself. What I was thinking about was the way she'd climbed down from that wagon, not asking permission, not waiting to be handed down, just climbed down and sat on the crate like she was used to doing things for herself. And the way she'd said, "I know who you are, not scared, not soft, just telling me a fact." There was something steady in her. Under the torn dress and the bruise, something that hadn't broken. I thought about that. Then I thought about Prute, and I thought about August Vass and his 50 acres, and I made a decision I'd been edging toward for 2 days without admitting it. When I came back through Springer 4 days later, I went to see August Vass. He lived in a small house east of town, frame construction, well kept, a garden out front that somebody had worked carefully. He was maybe 60, lean and weathered, with his daughter's same directness in his eyes. I told him who I was. He already knew. He said, "She's all right. She's with Margaret Collies. She's all right." He sat down in a chair on his porch and looked at his hands. "Prute'll come for the note," he said. "It's due in 30 days. I know. I sat down too. Red Casper knows a land lawyer who might find something interesting in that paperwork. I don't know how that comes out, but I wanted you to know there are people in this town who know what happened." He looked at me a long time. "Why are you doing this?" Same question his daughter had asked. I gave him the same answer. He nodded slowly. "She told me about you," he said. "She said you didn't ask questions, just moved the crate and let her in." He looked out at the road. "There aren't many men left who do things that way." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Nora was working in Margaret's garden when I came by the following week. She had a canvas apron on and her hair up, and she was on her knees pulling Johnson grass from between the bean rows, with the kind of focused attention that means you've been at something for a while and you're going to finish it. She looked up when she heard me, and the bruise was fading greenish-yellow now, the eye mostly open. "How's Delmer's leg?" she said. That surprised me. I'd mentioned the horse in passing days ago, the night she'd climbed down. She'd remembered. "Sound," I said. "Rest helped." She sat back on her heels and pulled her gloves off. "Red Casper came to see my father, and the lawyer. I've heard. There's a problem with the execution clause in the note, something about the witness signature." She looked at me steadily. "Brower thinks it might not hold." "Good. Was that you?" "That was Red," I said. "I just carried the message." She studied me the way she'd studied me that first night, the same quality of attention, like she was reading something slowly and making sure she had it right. "I've been thinking about what happens next," she said. "Whatever Brower finds, my father's land is still under pressure. Prout still has money and lawyers." She paused. "I can't stay at Margaret's indefinitely." "No. I have some schooling. I could teach, maybe, if a school would have me." She looked down at the gloves in her hands. "Or I could go back to Occate and help my father and try not to make things worse for him by being there." I said, "Or something else." She looked up. I wasn't a man who talked much, and I wasn't going to start now. I said, "I have a house in town. It draws crooked, the stove. I know how to fix it, I just haven't." She was very still. "I'm not a young man," I said. "I'm not a rich one. I run freight and I know the roads and I do what I say I'll do. That's the whole of it." She held my eyes for a moment, then looked down at the gloves again. "That night," she said quietly, "when you opened the wagon, you didn't ask me a single question. You just moved the crate. You needed in. Most men would have wanted something for that." "I know." She was quiet long enough that I thought I'd said the wrong thing, gone too fast, presumed too much. I was getting ready to tell her to forget it, that I'd said more than I meant to, when she stood up from the garden bed and looked at me straight. "I need some time," she said. "Not much, a few weeks." "Take what you need." She nodded. Something in her face had changed, not soft exactly, but less guarded. Like a door that had been pushed to and latched was now just resting shut, no longer barred. The note problem resolved in the 3rd week of July. Brower found 2 defects, the witness irregularity and a misstated acceleration clause that Prout's man had apparently written in a hurry. Neither was fatal on its own, but together they made the note unenforceable without a full refiling, and Prout, when Red Casper's lawyer sent the letter, chose not to refile. Maybe he decided August Vass's 50 acres weren't worth the fight. Maybe he decided there were too many people watching. Or maybe he just knew the wind had shifted. I heard it from Red on a Tuesday. I was loading salt and wire at the depot when he came up alongside me and said simply, "Vass is clear," and then walked on. I finished loading and drove the team to Margaret's. Nora was on the porch this time, a book open in her lap that she wasn't reading. She looked at my face when I came up the steps, and she knew before I said it. "It's done," I said. She let out a breath slow, like something she'd been holding for a long time. I sat in the other chair. We sat there a while. A wagon went by on the street. One of Margaret's cats came up and sat between us and washed its face. Finally she said, "I've been thinking about the stove." I waited. "The one that draws crooked." "Still does," I said. "I know how to fix a stove," she said. "My mother taught me. You need to look at the damper housing. It's almost always the damper housing." She said it matter-of-factly, like we were already in the middle of a conversation that had been going on for years. I said, "Is that so?" "It is." She closed the book. "I've been thinking that maybe a man who runs freight and keeps his word and moves a crate without making a production of it is a fairly rare thing to find." She looked at me, and her voice was level but her eyes were not. And I've been thinking that a rare thing, when you find it, you probably shouldn't let it drive away." I looked at her. The bruise was almost gone. What was left of it was just a shadow along her cheekbone, faint as old ink. She hadn't broken, not that night, not in the weeks since. She'd bent the way good timber bends and come back straight. I said, "You sure about this?" "I am," she said simply, "no performance in it." I nodded. We sat there another while in the quiet. The cat finished washing and curled up and went asleep. Down the street, somebody was hammering. The afternoon light was long and clean, the way it gets in July when the heat has run its course and the shadows come in long and steady from the west. After a time, she reached over and set her hand on my arm. Not a dramatic gesture. Just put her hand there, the way you set something down that belongs where you're putting it. I looked at her hand, then I looked at her. "There's a preacher at the Methodist church," I said. "I know him," she said. "He's a decent man." "I'll talk to your father first." "He'll say yes. He told me he would." "You talked to him already?" "I talked to my father," she said, and something in her tone was almost a smile, not quite but close. "Yes." I put my hand over hers. Her fingers were cool from sitting in the shade all afternoon, and there was a callus on her right palm from garden work, and the tip of her index finger had a small healed cut on it. Real hands, working hands, hands that had been doing things all her life without waiting to be helped. She turned her hand over under mine and held on. That was all. That was the whole of it. The street went on being a street. The cat slept. The hammering stopped and started and stopped again. I was not a young man. I was not a man people looked at twice when I walked through a room. I ran freight and I fixed fences, and I slept on one side of a bed that had been empty for a long time. But she knew that. She'd heard all of it, or enough of it to understand the shape of the thing, and she'd reached over and put her hand on my arm anyway. That is not a small thing. You carry certain things your whole life, certain weights, certain silences, certain empty spaces that you learn to work around the way you work around a healed-over wound. You stop expecting them to fill. You get up in the morning and you do the work and you go to bed, and that's the life, and it's enough, or you tell yourself it is. And then a woman puts her hand on your arm and holds on, and you realize you'd stopped believing it was possible. Her hand was warm in mine now. She didn't look at me with pity, and she didn't look at me with gratitude, and she didn't look at me the way women look at a man they're settling for. She looked at me the way you look at something that was worth waiting for. I had been running freight between Raton and Springer for 9 years. I knew every rut in the road, every grade, every creek crossing in 3 seasons. I knew which bridges would hold and which ones you tested first and which ones you went around. I had pulled off the road in the dark at the Colfax cutoff because a horse was favoring a leg. If I hadn't stopped there, if she'd come out of the brush 20 yards further up and found nothing but empty road. I don't think about that much. There's no use in it. You get the life you get, and sometimes the road delivers something to you in the dark that changes everything, and the only question is whether you're the kind of man who opens the wagon. I like to think I am. I held her hand, and the afternoon light came in long from the west, and the cat slept between us, and down the street the hammering started again, and that was the sound of things being built. That was enough. That was more than enough.